guys. Today we're going to be sewing some wonderful little bags. We're going to do a clutch purse, a wallet, and a coin purse, which is just a smaller version of the big purse. Right now what I have in front of me is the wallet. You can see these little dimensions right here. This pattern is symmetrical. So anything that you see on the one side, you're definitely going to see it on the other side, and you can see that it's a wallet. I did not put seam allowance on the pattern, so make sure that you add that whenever you cut it out. And like I said, it is symmetrical, so it's the same on both sides. So all of these little measurements are the exact same on either side of that middle line. Now, you do need interfacing for this project. Mine is very thin and flimsy. I did not get the purse weight interfacing. If you do choose to do this and you want to make it really sturdy, you want to take and do purse weight. Mine is also iron-on, but silly me forgot to bring an iron, so I'm going to be pad stitching the entire thing down. And you can watch me do that in a minute, but that just helps it stay down without having to iron it. And to get the size of the interfacing, you just fold the pattern like this, and that gives you the rectangular piece that'll go inside the middle rectangle on the fabric there. And then do not use this top piece to do the little dome. It is a slightly different size. These are the dimensions for that one. And as you can see, it has like squared off edges. You can do that as well, but I preferred the way it looked rounded, especially since the purse and the coin purse have rounded edges already built in, so I made this one so that it'll match the set. So you're going to take and you're going to cut out the piece of interfacing to match this particular pattern. And then of course I'll pad stitch this one down as well. If I had had an iron, I could have just ironed it on, or if you have self-adhesive, you can just peel the sticky off and stick it down. Whenever we get to it, I'm going to show you how to like cut your corners and everything, so that everything folds in correctly. Make sure you have a button handy to put on the wallet, and make sure that you leave your seam allowance. I have my thread and my needle, I think it's a size 10 sharp, maybe. It could be bigger, I can't remember honestly. It's not in a packet, it's just one that I had laying around. And then of course my thimble. Alright, so whenever you cut this out, it should have two pieces, and then you're interfacing. You're going to need the piece that you have. Make sure that you've marked out your pattern on both pieces of fabric, that way you can stitch along the lines. Pick one of them, put it wrong side up, and place your interfacing inside of it. At this point, of course, you could iron it down. Of course, I didn't bring an iron, so I'm going to be pad stitching it down. I still put the sticky side down. That way that if I do choose to iron it later, it'll self-adhere. But the pad stitching should hold it in place. Alright, so what you're going to want to do, you're going to start in the corner, and you're just going to want to take a little bit of fabric, just like that, and you're going to want to make sure it goes through both layers, just like that. That way it's holding the interfacing down to the actual fabric, and you pull your thread through and leave a teeny tiny little tail right there, because what you're going to do, you're going to go through that tail, and it's just catching the loop, and then you'll pull it tight so that it's down against the fabric. That'll keep it from popping out, because sometimes those knots will pop through, especially with something like quilter's cotton. Then you're going to move up a little bit. I did about a ½ an inch, and then you're going to take another little bite out of the fabric, just like that. Make sure you go all the way through. You're going to pull it through. Now the entire object of this is not to pull it tight. you're just wanting to make sure that this stuff stays in place. So you're pulling it taut, but not tight. You don't want it to be all jacked up, and plus it's going to be covered up anyway, so it doesn't really matter what it looks like. On the back side, all you're going to see is teeny tiny little pin pricks along it, and it looks fine. Or again, you could iron it down and skip this step, but you're going to keep pad stitching your entire way up. Then you're going to have to go over to the middle and rotate your work so that you're at the other end of it, and pad stitch your way up the middle, then rotate it again and pad stitch your way down the opposite end, like you're going to see in just a second. It doesn't take very long. It's not very complicated. You just rotate like that, and then you're going to take and start here in the middle, and you're going to go all the way up and then down the other side, of course rotating your work as you go. And as you can see, the stitches are pretty much invisible, just teeny tiny little pinpricks here and there. The entire thing is you don't want to gather too much thread in, too much of the fabric inside those threads, because it'll be obvious that you've stitched it. But as you can see, I went up, across, and then back down, and then across again, and then back up the middle. The side, rotating as I go, and it's just a zigzag, so it's not that bad. So we need to tie off this thread. So let's go ahead and grab a little bite of fabric here like this. I did not take that one through to the other side. It's just through the interfacing, and you're going to take your loop and just thread it through once and twice. And then you should just be able to give it a tug, and it should snug up against the fabric, and that'll prevent it from coming undone. I'm just going to take my nice shears and just snip, and then we are done with that. And then, of course, I have this teeny tiny little tail of thread, which is not really good for anything, so I'm going to take it off and rethread my needle in just a second. It's definitely not enough to pad stitch this piece. Okay, again, you're going to line this up with the little lines on the edges. You want to make sure, the reason this is two separate pieces is just for the fact that you need the separation in between it. That way that it can fold over properly. And then you're just going to take and pad stitch exactly like you did before, but you want to make sure that you are very careful with how you do it, because it's much smaller, see there? So I made sure that my stitches were a little bit closer together, and everything is held together. Alright, so you need the other piece of fabric, and you're going to put them what are called right sides together, aka the outside of the fabric, the pretty side, quote unquote pretty side, together. And you're going to want to make sure that the pieces are as lined up as they can be. Keep in mind, this entire way through you can totally use pins to hold everything together, but since I am a forgetful person, I left all of my pins at home, so I was not able to pin it down this entire project, either one of the ones that I did, because I filmed them on the same day. And that is okay. You don't have to do it with pins, but it's going to be a little bit neater if you do use pins, and it'll be easier to keep it from sliding around. Alright, so we're going to take and be sewing all the way around the entire perimeter of this whole thing. And you're going to leave a certain space here in just a second. I use my fist, that way that you can see how wide it needs to be. Not because your fist is going inside of it, but it just makes it approximate that it would be easy to take and flip. Especially with interfacing in it. The more interfacing you have, the stiffer it is and harder to turn. But that's okay, it's not that bad. But I'm putting an X here so that you see that between those two marks you do not stitch at all. Between here and here, no stitching. And so you're going to take and start right here at the first mark, and we're going to take a little stitch here. And whenever you're doing this, you're going to want to make sure that you are stitching on the line. Don't forget your thimble. Comes in handy. But you're going to take your stitch, and I'm doing catching my loop here, and it's kind of sideways, so give me just 1 second. As soon as that gets lined up, it'll be snug. Okay. Make sure that my string's untwisted. But anyway, you're going to stitch along this line all the way around it, and your seam allowance will stay on the outside of it. It's not that bad, but you're going to take, and I'm going to be doing what's called a running back stitch. So you're going to take and do 3 running stitches, which is just going up and down through the fabric over and over again, which is what most people think of as sewing, but it's a stitch that's not meant to take strain. So it's good for stuff like this because it's internalized, but to keep it from slipping around and stuff, because there's nothing to stop the thing from slipping back and forth, you're going to take and do every 3 of those stitches that go up and down like that, you're going to take and do a back stitch, which means you're going to take and go back 1 stitch and come back through. So what I do my 3 running stitches, and then you take it back between where you just came up through the fabric and the end of the last stitch, go down through the fabric, and then continue your running stitches through there. And you're going to see me do that in just 1 second. But that's the easiest way to do a very quick but semi-strong stitch. Because like I said, this is not going to be taking that much strain. It's just a little wallet that you would stick your cards and stuff in. And this part of the actual structure of it is not like a seam that's going to take strain. Like if I was going to do the bottom of like a purse or something, that the weight of everything that's inside is weighted, like sitting on it, then I might choose to do a back stitch instead, which is much stronger. And that's just a whole string of those back stitches that I told you about, where you go back a stitch and come through. But the running stitch mixed with a back stitch makes it decently strong. It holds its own, but it's also, if it comes undone, it's only going to go so far, and you have the opportunity to repair the item before it actually like falls apart. But yeah, so you see me here doing the back stitch and then continuing my running stitches. It's not that bad. It's just kind of backing up and doing almost like a loop. But you do your running stitch 3 times, and then you just loop around and go through for the back stitch, and then continue your running stitches. And you're going to do that the entire way around this thing, except for the section that I marked with an X not to stitch at. And that's going to take and allow you to flip this item inside out. This thing is surprisingly easy. Once you stitch around the outside edge, it's really, really easy to turn it into a wallet. It's actually a lot simpler than I thought it was going to be whenever I picked this item to make. Because I started with the coin purse, honestly, as a demo, just to see if it would be worth my time to make a full-sized one to present to you guys. And the coin purse turned out pretty decently, and then I had the wallet pattern, and I was like, well, I'll give that one a shot too, just to see. The wallet is 10 times easier than the purse / coin purse, because it doesn't involve that much flipping and turning and sewing certain things special ways and everything. You'll see what I mean in a minute when I show you how to do the purse, because if you're going to do the coin purse, you just use the smaller pattern, which you'll see as well. Pause for a second. The actual corners are not that hard. Usually whenever I get to the edge of the corner, I go ahead and do a back stitch and then do my running stitches around the corner. And you just do that all the way around. And whenever you're done, go ahead and turn it inside out. And once you've got it turned inside out, fold in the edges of the hole that you had to pull the thing through. And you're going to want to take and stitch those closed. If you know what a whip stitch is, feel free to go ahead and whip stitch that closed. That's for missing that step. But now what we're going to do is you're going to take the 2 side flaps of this structure, and we're going to whip stitch them together. So you can whip stitch the hole closed, just like I'm getting ready to show you, because we're going to whip stitch these things together. So what you do is you just obviously take a bite out of the fabric like we normally do, and then you're going to take and go through both of the edges, and you're just going to keep looping it over and over and over the entire length up. It takes some time, but it's super duper quick. My problem is every time I'm so close to the edge right now that every time I pull my thread, it gets caught on the corner. But as you get further up it, it's no longer a problem. Slightly off camera here, I'm going and doing some of the whip stitches, just holding everything together. It's not that hard, you're just looping around that edge, which you can actually see me doing here, and you just keep going. Okay, so we're about halfway up it. It's not really, it seems like I'm going slower than I am, but that was honestly for the sake of me showing you how to do it. Of course you can go much faster than what I'm doing here, but because of I wanted to make sure I had enough footage to splice together to put it into a cohesive video. I've already jumped all the way to the other end of the thing, but whenever I got done, the reason it's so chopped up is because I accidentally had about 2.5 hours worth of footage, and I had to cut it down to about 45 minutes. So unfortunately that happened, but that's okay. We still got a good video out of it. So what you're going to do, you're going to open this back up, and now you can see the seam. It's down the inside middle, and the flap is up top. Now what you're going to do is fold this in half so that the two edges are right up against each other, kind of like that, and the seam is in the middle. Now you're just going to pinch those two seams together and leave it like that. You're going to take your thread, which is still attached to that edge, and you're going to take and attach those 4 little pieces that you can see there. You're going to attach those together. And what that's going to do is make it into 2 pockets with an accordion type side. And you don't have to attach anything other than just those top little corners to each other, and it usually fixes the problem. You go around it a few times and it's strong enough that it holds everything in place. Thread keeps getting caught on the edge of those things, but that's okay. We get that all tightened up there. And if you're having issues getting the needle through the thread, through the fabric, use your thimble on your middle finger to push it through. Some people wear it on their ring finger, but the way my fingers angle themselves whenever I'm sewing, it's not beneficial for me to wear it on my ring finger. It works out better on my middle finger. My glass thimble is great, but it does not have holes on the side, so whenever I go to push it with the side of my finger, it just slips off. So usually I use my great-grandmother's metal thimble. Me and her wear the same size, and it usually works out better because it's got ridges all the way around it. Whereas my glass one only has it on the tip, which is great for pushing stuff through from the tip, but if I want to do it as I'm sewing, I need something with the little holes on the side. Alright, so as you can see here, the flap folds down perfectly and lands just a little bit above the bottom. So now we have our little 2-pocket thing, our little wallet. Should be big enough for your cards and your cash to fit in. It's not that big, but it's great. Now we got to put in the button. So this is what everybody dreads doing because they don't know how to do a buttonhole. So what you're going to do is you're going to place your button, and I'm showing you here that you can see the imprint of the button through the fabric. I put my fingers on either side of it, and usually I go ahead and draw my line there, which is fine. You can totally do it this way, but I did make a boo-boo and forget to anchor down my button first. Usually I match up where it's going to be on the inside and go ahead and stitch it down, and then put my flap down and mark out where the actual line will be for me to cut later. That way that the button has not shifted from where I wanted it, because it's harder to lay the button down and match it up with the line once it's already drawn. So put your button on first, like I'm showing you right now. You just go up and down through the fabric, wrapping around and around the middle of the button. It's not very hard to put on a button. And then you put your flap down and draw your line. And that works out like the best. most people know how to put on a button, and if you don't, I do apologize for that. That's covered in another video, so we're not going to worry about that here. But anyway, so you take and put on your button like so. And once it's anchored down really well, I'll be right back and I'll show you how to finish out the buttonhole. Alright, so now the button's anchored down and I've already moved my line over once. So what you're going to do is you're going to fold that line in half. That way that it's half on one side, half on the other side, just like that. Make sure you flip it back and forth a few times to make sure that you see that it's even on both sides, or at least even-ish. And take your shears and just snip that line so that it goes through all those layers. See? Just like that. Now, it's a good idea to test fit your button. That way that you make sure that it fits through the hole. Otherwise, you're going to have a very bad time if you put it in and have to take it back out. So, as you can see, mine is a little bit snug. That's perfectly fine because you want it to be snug because it will stretch out over time, as most buttonholes do. So mine is decently snug. It's a little bit tough to get it out and in with just one hand, but it's not the end of the world. Caught on a thread there. But you want it a little bit snug for the first few times because after you put in the actual thread and after you use it a few times, it'll stretch itself out to its final form. Alright, so we're going to show you how to do a buttonhole. So you're going to put your needle into the hole in the middle and bring it up through all those little layers of fabric. And you're going to want to make sure you catch that loop. Alright, so this is the buttonhole stitch. So you take and put your needle through the middle and up through the fabric like that. And then you're going to take your thread from the side that's coming out of the fabric and you're going to want to wrap it underneath the tail end of the needle and then underneath the head end of the needle. Pull your needle through just like that, and that's going to create what is called the buttonhole stitch. Now, as you're pulling, you want to make sure you're pulling towards the middle of the buttonhole because that will put the knot on the inside edge and prevent it from fraying in the future. So you're going to, again, stick your needle through the middle of the buttonhole, up through the fabric, and then wrap that tail underneath the needle on the back and the needle on the front, and then pull your needle through. And then pull towards the middle of the buttonhole. Ignore those loose threads because they get tied up with the actual thread and stay where they're supposed to. Alright, so we're doing that again. Make sure that you gently pull, and then as you get it close to the end of the thing, you go ahead and pull it really tight, and it makes a nice buttonhole edge. I missed my loop. Alright, so there we go. And then you give it a tug again towards the middle of the thing. And it's starting to turn into a buttonhole. Alright, so let's get to the end of the edge of the buttonhole there. I've already went down one side and I'm doing the very, I guess technically it's the middle of the buttonhole, but it's the opposite end. So you have to put a few stitches into the end of that because it's not, it's not really wide enough for you to make a round or anything, so put like 3 of them into the same area. And then we went down the opposite side, and I'm getting ready to finish off the buttonhole here. So what you're going to do is go through the middle of the buttonhole again and tie your knot like you normally would put off those things, and then thread it through the middle of the fabric layers just a little ways away. And then when you pull that fabric down on the thread, snip it off. And then that way, whenever you let go of the fabric, it actually pulls it inside of the fabric and you don't have to worry about that knot / stitch sticking out in the middle of nowhere. It's a sneaky way of hiding your knots. But now it should be finished. You have your button and your buttonhole, and it should fit together. And it makes a very nice little wallet. Now again, you can upgrade your materials by using whatever you want. You can take and put your cards and your cash in it. You can totally change it to purse weight interfacing if you like, and that'll make it a lot stiffer. And again, you can change out the buttons, the shape of the buttonholes, or if you have a machine that you want to do, all of this can be done on machine, including the buttonhole. They make an attachment for that nowadays, and you can totally just pop it in the machine and go. Me, I prefer doing it by hand anyway, so it was nice to get the opportunity to try that. However, if I was doing this like on a mass scale, I'd probably use a machine. But that's what all three of them end up looking like finished. But I wanted to make sure that you saw that it is a matching set. And we are pretty much done with the wallet. Now I'm going to show you how to do the actual purse. Now, be prepared, this gets a little bit complicated. This teeny pattern right here is for the coin purse if you choose to make it. And it has the dimensions. You can pause the video and look at those in just a second. But this is the big one. So I upscaled the small one by 2. That way that it is double the size, and it makes it the perfect size to hold the wallet and the change purse and a couple of keys or whatever to stick in there. The pattern is symmetrical, just like the other one. Again, no seam allowance, and it's just a small, I say bag, it's a small handbag, and it has the dimensions on there. I put them on there in inches, and you'll see that the other one is in, I think it's in centimeters, but I may have converted it. I can't remember. But it's easier to do in centimeters if you're doing your measuring. Now, what I was showing you, that side number, there's a line that goes from the bottom of that triangle over to the tip right there, and it's the same dimension as that one going up the side there, and the tip is halfway up the dimension there. I forgot to take a picture of the actual thing before I cut it out, but it's like a big square there, and then you cut out that triangle like I have there. Now you need a bigger button for this because it is a bigger bag. You can do 2 buttons, or you can do no buttons. You could do snaps if you wanted to, but you're going to take and cut out your fabric with seam allowance, because I did not include that in the pattern, and that way that you have your line there. We're going to take and do 3 layers of interfacing if you're using the same flimsy kind that I have, or again, you could use purse weight interfacing instead. I didn't have that on hand. I just had this. Normally, I would sandwich them together and iron them, but today we are going to have to pad stitch them together, and they'll stay very strong and sturdy. But it's just an extra step that I just forgot to bring the right interfacing, and I didn't bring an iron. So we're going to take and do this the hard way. So I'm going to pad stitch this, which you've already seen, so I'm just going to let you watch me do it a couple of times just in case you skipped ahead and didn't see me do it before, and then I will just join you back when it's finished. Alright, so I've made it all the way down the side, the middle, and then the other side, and as you can see, it holds the fabric in place very, very well. So yeah, you can see that I have these flaps that are kind of hanging out in the middle of nowhere. You're going to want to put the interfacing side down and have your fancy fabric side up. This is the pretty, quote-unquote, pretty side. You're going to want to take your other piece of fabric and lay it pretty side down over top of the other piece. That way that you have the whole thing together, because what you're going to do is stitch those together in a certain way, and they have to be facing this direction and everything, and it's, honestly, this is a lot of turning, but it is okay. Once you get the hang of it, it's not that hard, and it's really not that complicated, but it's just one of those things that's kind of tedious. So what you're going to do is you're going to take and have them together like that. Make sure that everything's lined up properly. Make sure the two pretty sides are together. And then you're going to take and stitch along the side of it. Make sure you keep your interfacing side down. For now, silly me did not draw lines on this side of the fabric, so I am going to turn mine over in just a second to stitch along the line. It shouldn't make that much of a difference, but I try to give you directions, that way it kind of helps a little bit. But you're going to take and stitch from the point on one side across the top and down to the point on the other side, and that's it. You don't want to stitch any more than that. And you're doing, again, the running back stitch like we did on the other, on the wallet. Just make sure that you were stitching on that line. My interfacing has slid just a little bit before I pad stitched it down. So I'm going to trim that end off in just a second, just a little bit. You're not going to see it, but I did trim it just a tad. That way that whenever I turned it, it didn't do funky things. Alright, so we're almost at the end here. Make sure you go all the way to the point. And then, now that I'm done with the sewing, I'm going to go ahead and trim these little corners here. Anytime you have an outward facing corner, you want to take a chunk, like a pie piece out of it. Do not cut your stitching, because that'll completely defeat the purpose and it'll fall apart. But you want to cut these notches out. That way when you flip it inside out, the pieces of fabric kind of nestle against each other instead of having a fold, which will make it pinch and buckle and do really ugly things to the thing. You want to have a very clean finish. You want to clip your corners like this. And so now we're going to flip it inside out, just like that. Now normally you would iron this as you're going to make sure that everything has a smooth edge and is flat and everything. Obviously I didn't bring my iron, so I'm going to take and try to make it as smooth as possible, and then I'm going to kind of finger iron it, which is where you take and pinch it and rub it and everything and get the heat from your hands to cause the fabric to lay flat. It doesn't always work, but luckily cotton is one of the ones that does a decent job of finger ironing. If you really want a good example of what a good fabric for finger ironing would be linen, because it creases so easily. It makes a fantastic finger iron. But as you can see, I'm pinching here, and that's going to get it as flat as it possibly can without having an actual heated iron on it. Just make sure that your seams are lined up properly so that they're not all, that your fabric's not overlapping onto one side or the other. It's just split right down the middle like it should be. Alright, so there's no way I'll get those wrinkles out, and that's going to bother me, but it'll be okay. Just make sure that you hold it and press it, and make sure the heat from your hands are kind of holding down the fabric and the wrinkles and everything, or like I said, you could iron it. So now, make sure that you push all of your flap edges so that they're straight and flat. Be very careful with them because they'll slide around. Again, a pin would be helpful during this, that way that they're not moving. Honestly, not pinning things tends to complicate them, but it's okay. So now this comes the funky part that I'm talking about, the weird turning. You're going to open this so that the ugly sides are both facing the table on both sides. And you're going to fold the flap like this towards the fabric side, not the side with the interfacing. The interfacing one is the one at the top of your screen. The fabric one is at the bottom. So you're going to take this and you're going to keep them together, and you're going to put that unfinished edge against the edge of the padded side with the interfacing, like that. And you're going to stitch from that corner crease there all the way up to the top of the flap. And you're going to do the same on the other side. And in just a second I'll show you what I mean, because it kind of makes a pocket, except for the little fabric flap that's at the bottom. It still hangs loose the entire time until we finally get done with this section. So I'm putting this other side back, and see how it makes a pocket with the flap at the bottom and the flap at the top. The flap at the top has the interfacing in it. Alright, so you're going to stitch up the edges there. That way that the pocket will be connected to the strong flap with the interfacing. And then we'll deal with the fabric flap in just a second. But you're going to take and do, again, the same running back stitch that we've been doing for this whole thing. Okay, the pocket's done. So we're going to take the interfacing flap, keep it flat, interfacing down. You're going to take this pocket and you're going to fold it in on itself. I'm showing you how it looks right there. It's just the pocket hanging out there on the side. But we're not going to lay it like that. We're actually going to push it inside like that so that the pocket is out of the way. Because what you're going to do next, and you're going to want to make sure that this is laid very flat, not the pocket itself, but the back flap, because you're getting ready to stitch the fabric flap to that flap with the interfacing. So you're going to lay the pretty side of your fabric flap to the pretty side of the pocket slash other flap, and you're going to want to make sure that it's lined up very well. I would recommend pinning this part because mine did shift around just ever so slightly. And then you're going to stitch all the way around except for, again, a small section. This one I didn't make as big as my fist. I should have, but I wanted to be very careful to get the top edge of that pocket and to get close to the bottom as I could, because you don't want to leave that bottom corner open because it's really hard to stitch. So that last inch right there, I'm stitching on its own. And then I'm going to start stitching again on the opposite side of the opening. That way that it'll be really, really secure. Alright, so I'm starting stitching on the other side of the opening. And again, you're doing the same running back stitch like we did before. And you're going to go the entire way around all the way to the bottom on the other side. Do not sew across the bottom, because we're flipping this inside out, and if you sew across that bottom, it will not flip, and if you do manage to get it inside out, it will keep the pocket closed. It will completely mess up the entire project. If you do happen to forget and you do stitch that bottom closed, then get your seam ripper out. It's time to learn how to pull the stitches back out. And you'll just pull all those stitches back out and restitch the end so that it's not closing up the bottom there. Alright, so I'm at the end of the line there, and you're going to see me take and stitch a couple times and make sure to tie off your knot there, and then we'll be turning this inside out. And because I made that the hole to turn it out in so small, it is a little bit of a challenge, but that's okay. It just takes a little bit of extra time and a lot of patience. Alright, so let's get to turning. So you're going to open the hole on the side. Your stitching should be secure, so you should be fine. Now it's time to turn it out, and it's going to be complicated because it's got a lot of interfacing in it, so it's very stiff. Not as stiff as it could be, but again, stiff. So you're going to have to help it through by folding and crumpling and everything. Granted, don't get halfway through and then just stop, because that stuff will get wrinkled, and then it'll cause your final product to be kind of funky shaped, which I guess you could solve by ironing again, but again, I don't have an iron, so we have to get this turned out as decently quick as possible. So now I've got it all the way through, I think. Yeah. Alright, and the hole should now be on the inside of the purse. So now what you're going to do is flip this back inside out, like so. And it should lay flat-ish like that. And the hole will be on the back side. And that's just so that you have ease of access and you can actually stitch it closed. So you're going to see me flatten this out, and then you're going to see me flip it over. Make sure you've got everything as flat as you can get it. Again, an iron would be handy. Alright, so there I'm holding the actual hole closed, but it's on the edge of that little flap that's sticking out. And you're actually going to stitch the hole closed. Not the flap, though. You want to leave that part open. So you can see right there, I'm just going to stitch the fabric to the outer fabric there. I'm not going through the actual flap or anything like that. I'm just stitching the hole closed. And I'm doing this with whip stitches as well, which you may or may not have seen earlier, but it's just looping stitches that connect the two pieces together. Kind of think of the laces on an old-fashioned football. It starts at one end and it just kind of loops around the seam as it goes towards the other end. And it does help if you hold your work like this so that you've got the two edges you're working on together right there pinched, and you go in one side and go up a little bit and out the other side, kind of at a diagonal. And you want to get it as close to the middle of that seam as you can. That way that whenever you actually lay it flat, the stitches pretty much disappear. Honestly, it'll be on the inside of the purse, so if you're not good at whip stitches, some people aren't, you can totally just hide it inside the purse and nobody will ever know. And then you just take and tie it off when you get to the other end of the hole. Snip. Okay, so now you're going to want to take and stitch down the edge of each one of those flaps on the side that's facing the bottom of the purse. That way that whenever you turn this back inside out, it's going to take and cause them to accordion fold inside of the actual purse. So now I'm turning it inside out. You'll see what I mean in just a second. Poke your corners out. Make sure you get them nice and poked out. And now those flaps just kind of nestle inside there, see? And that was just the running back stitch just down that folded edge, just to give it the structure of the stitches. And you don't have to do that if you don't want to, but then you'll be poking the flaps in every single time you close this purse. Alright, so now it's the time again for buttons and buttonholes, which you just saw me do on the wallet. Again, you're going to take and place your button, find out where it is, draw your line, all that jazz. Do make sure to put your button on before you draw your line. Okay, so grab a hold of the button with your thumb and go ahead and start stitching your button on. Be careful not to stab yourself, which is the one problem with buttons that I hate, because I do have a tendency, if I'm not careful, to do that. And then voila, you go ahead and cut your buttonhole like before, sew it, and you can take and close it up just like that. Now you have a purse, and if you make the smaller version, then you have the coin purse and the wallet. And as always, thanks for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the Gaston County Public Library YouTube channel. We have tons of library content just waiting for you to watch. Bye!